All right, we have our window framed in, we have our cripples in and our header. Now, in this segment, what we're going to do is we're going to finish out the bottom of the window. We're going to put in our cripple studs, we're going to put in our window sill plates, and we're going to follow the layout that we have in place. So let's get started. The first step is to measure out how big our window is going to be. Now we have a 6-foot wide opening, and we're going to have a 6x3 window, so we're going to come down 3 feet. Now most windows, if they're vinyl windows these days, they just go net. So that means when you put in the window, you do the rough measurement just like the window says. If it's 6 foot wide and 3 foot by 3 foot, you do a 6 foot wide by 3 foot opening. And the window company makes the window a little bit smaller, and it should fit in that window. But always check with your window company before you do your framing, because rough openings for wood windows and aluminum windows and vinyl windows sometimes can be different. Because I measure from the top because I know my window's going to go all the way up to the header. Now, if you really want to make it hard on yourself, you could measure the whole stud, the cripple stud, and then say, okay, take off 3 feet from 93 inches and minus, and you don't want to do all that. It's easiest, just measure straight down, you make your mark, and then you measure back up again to get your cripple stud length. So try to get this just to go nice and quick and easy so you can just get through this step and move on to your next part of the building. We start right here. We're gonna measure down from the top, from the header, down, and mark 3 feet. Okay? I'm gonna just do this. I'm gonna put 2 X's because I know I'll have 2 sill plates coming across. Here's a cool tip. Tri-squares are really handy because they really make your life go a lot easier. You can do things a lot faster with them. And the one that I like to use when I'm framing, since all dimensional lumber usually is by 1.5 inches, if it says 2 by it's 1.5 inches, I just make a little mark on my tri-square at 1.5 inches. So I'll put a line across at my crow's foot, and then I'll come down on my tri-square here to 1.5 inches, which is right there. And I'll make another line, and I'll come down to that line, and I'll make another line. And so those are my sill plates. I'm going to measure up to that point from the sill plate to get the length of my cripple studs. And I'll do this on this side, and I'll do it on that side. You see how you have your mark here, and you can see the line, your original line right across here. I just slide down, and I meet that line, and I make my mark. And then I move it down to the mark I just made. I see the line again, and I make my second mark. And so what that does is it gives me a nice section for my sill plate, for my window sill plate. Now I'm going to have a double plate, and I do a double plate on a window because it gives a nice meaty section, so when you do your trim around your window, you have a nice place to nail. Some people just put one window sill plate on. Once you get the window on and the window finned and everything, if you don't have a nice place to nail on your trim can start getting a little bit weavy. So I always put it on the double window sill trim. It's an extra piece of wood, but it really makes it a lot more sturdy, and it makes it easier in the end run. So I'll repeat the process on this cripple right here, and just stay with me. And I'm ready to move on to my next step. All right, we have our sill plates marked on our cripple studs. Now what we're going to do is, most people would say, yes, now we can cut a bunch of studs and build this thing. Well, that would be the easiest thing, you'd think, but we have a trick for you. If we cut our sill plate first, we can slide it right on down to the lower plate, and we can mark where our studs are. That way, when we go ahead and nail it down, we'll have a place to put our studs, and I'll show that to you. But this is the quickest way to do it, so you don't have to get out your tape measure and start measuring again on the sill plate. You basically can do that just by laying it down on the lower plate and matching the layout that's on that plate. Remember, when you're measuring for your windowsill plate, you measure where your plate's going to go. Now I'm at 72 and 1/16 here. You do not, on the other hand, want to measure down here, because if there's any variance of your from cripple to cripple, in other words, if they're in a little bit, you go ahead and cut that length. When you get up to the top here, it's going to be too short or too long. So always measure the wood at the area where you're going to put it in. So again, I think I'm at 72 and 1/16. I'm going to cut it at 72. That's 6 foot, just what our opening should be. You notice that I'm cutting 2, so I don't have to walk back and forth and cut the second one. So I've taken the sill plate and I've laid it down on the sole plate, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark off the layout on my sill plate. So I'm down here and I'm marking my layout line. Put my X on this side because I know my X is on this side, and I'll continue doing that down the plate here. The nice thing about this is that our layout marks across our sill plate are going to match up now with our sole plate, our layout marks down below. And that's important because if the walls are racked, if they're out of plumb, if they're racked and you haven't straightened them yet, then what's going to happen is if you don't do it this way and you put the sill plate in and you use a level and you think, great, these look nice and straight, and you nail them in place, and you come back later and you straighten your walls, then all those studs are going to move when you straighten the walls, and you're going to have nice straight studs over there, but all your little cripple studs in here are all going to be leaning. So you don't want leaning studs. You want them to be lined up nicely. So you use all your layout all through your building, you'll have nice straight studs. If you start using a level while you're framing, you start running into problems. So stay true to your layout and you'll be in good shape. We've reached the part of our project now where we're going to cut our cripple studs. Now, I have all these short pieces of wood because on a job site, after you cut your studs, if you have walls that are a little bit taller or shorter, sometimes you'll have a lot of scrap. And a window is a great place to get rid of some of this scrap. So I have all these pieces that are varying sizes. So the first thing I'll do is I'll grab one of these scraps and I'll slide it right down here, and I'll just go right to my bottom line and I'll make a mark, a crow's foot, right on that line. I do that because that's easier than taking out my tape measure, measuring, walking over and measuring. If I mark it right where it's at, I know this one's going to be good. So what I'll do is I'll say number 1 and number 1. So I'll take another piece of wood, a piece of scrap, and I'll come over and I'll do the same thing on this cripple. I'll go to the bottom line, I'll make a crow's foot, and I'll write number 2 upside down. So I'll know which cripple is which. So now I'll step over here and I'll cut these 2 cripples. All right, one quick thing about cutting cripples. When you're grabbing blocks from the job site, be aware that sometimes they'll be cut, well, just a little bit askew, okay? A little bit askew is not too bad if you measure off the long point. A little bit askew is bad if you measure off the short point, because then your piece is going to be too long and you'll have a big bow in your sill plate. So what you do is you try to find, you look for the studs that already have the manufactured end on them, and you measure from that end over. On something like this where I got both ends cut, I'll kind of look at it, check it, and that's the better to the two. That's pretty good, and I'll use that end. If you don't do that, pretty soon you start getting wavy sill plates. So I'll nail this one right here. Ah! Not the right one. You always want to make sure you have the right cripple in the right place. Now, my cripple here is covering my line. When I put it on here, that might be due to a variance in the sill plate, the sole plate, excuse me. So if I'm a little above my line, I'm going to start gaining a little bit as I go up. I don't think that's a big critical issue. If you're only a 16th or an 1/8 off, it's not a big deal in a window, because the windows are usually about an inch smaller than the opening. You have a 1/2 inch on top and a 1/2 inch on the bottom. So your opening can be a little bit out. You don't have to really sweat it and make sure that it's absolutely perfect, running back and forth to the saw. So as long as it's right in there close, you should be good. Now I'll just hold it. I hold it like this. Maybe my hands are a little bit too big here, but I just generally hold it like this so I can feel both sides of the stud when I nail it, because I don't want my cripple to be over here and have a big bump on the inside. I'll put a couple nails at the top, and then I'll stagger my nails down, and I'll put a couple toenails into the sole plate. Yeah. Step over to the other cripple, and I'll nail that in place, and then we can go ahead and put in our sill plate. All right, you grab your sill plate, and you want to make sure it's not wrong. In other words, when I lay it down here, make sure that your layout lines up. So, my layout works well this way. So drop it in. Next, we'll measure our cripple stud lengths. 32 3/4, 32 3/4. Now I'm just going to march down, and I'm going to measure these. I'm going to put the measurements there, and then I'm going to put them on my handy little block and carry them to where I'm going to cut my studs. Okay, well, now I'm going to cut those cripples. We're almost done. We'll come back, we'll nail them in place, and then the last thing is we'll grab the other plate that we already cut, we'll nail that in, and we walk away. Next, we'll put in our cripple studs, and I'm just going to follow the layout like we did all along. Occasionally what will happen when you're putting in your studs is you'll bump into a foundation bolt or a washer. Now, it's just, I mean, I'm so close to my line when I hit it, let's say 1/4 of an inch. You can trim off a little bit of, just run your saw blade at the bottom of your stud and trim off a little bit to make it slide over the top of that washer. Sometimes you'll have to do that. In this case, I'm so close to my layout line when I hit the washer, I'm going to go ahead and put it in place. I don't think that much difference if a piece of plywood lands on it is going to affect my layout. So just wanted to mention that. One thing to bear in mind, when you come over with your cripple studs and you start putting them in, some may go in well, some may fight with you. If it fights with you, step over, trim a little bit off of it, and come back. And if it's too short, it's probably okay, because the nails will hold it in place if it's just an 1/8 too short. If it's 1/4 too short, now that's up to you, because if you can live with it, that's all right, I guess. But generally what you'd like to do is you'd like to get that stud to be the right length. So spend a few moments, go cut the new stud, use that one that's too short for a shorter cripple stud somewhere else. Another little trick is when you're nailing toenails like this, I usually hold it about 1/4 of an inch further away than it needs to be when I start my first toenail. Because by the time I finish hitting that toenail, it's going to move the stud over and over and over and over. If you start right on the line, you'll be too far over the line. So start a little bit away from the line and your toenails will come out all right. All right, we're ready to put our sill plate on, our top sill plate. You can call it your double sill plate. And this one doesn't have any criteria. You do realize though, if when you marched ahead and you put this first sill plate on without the studs down here, and if you got carried away and ran over here and then threw this one on second and nailed it down nice and good, you'd have a real rough time nailing your studs in. So one plate, studs, then your double plate. Now what I'll be doing is I'll be doing just what I did on most everything else. I'll put 2 toenails into this cripple, 2 toenails into this cripple, and then I'll stagger my nails just like I have been on the rest of my cripples. Okay, so your sills and your cripples get staggered nails so the wood doesn't twist.
Home Improvement Camp. Have at it.